When the enchanting Mina arrives in the secluded riverside village of Awara, she is everything the villagers have never seen: elegant, mysterious, and dangerously charming. In a community where newcomers are few and secrets are guarded fiercely, Mina quickly becomes the object of every man's attention and every woman's suspicion. Yet beneath her captivating allure lies a hidden motive. Mina's sights are set on Dayo, the powerful village elder whose fortune holds the key to her future. But Dayo is no fool. As Mina weaves a web of desire and deception, Dayo quietly watches, determined to expose her true purpose before she can tear his village apart. With the clock ticking, Mina's carefully laid plans begin to unravel as loyalties shatter, jealousy flares, and the village descends into chaos. Faced with the emotional wreckage of her scheme, Mina must confront the haunting question: has her ambition driven her too far, and is it too late to turn back? In this tale of desire, betrayal, and moral consequence, readers are taken deep into a world where ambition collides with integrity, and no one leaves unscathed. The sun was sinking low as Mina's carriage approached the quiet riverside village of Awara, casting the landscape in a warm, golden hue. She leaned out of the window, watching the village come into view, a cluster of modest homes surrounded by thick trees and the lazy curve of the river that gave the place its name. Mina took a deep breath, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and anticipation settle in her chest. This would be her fresh start. No one here knew her past or the things she had done to survive. The villagers would see only what she allowed them to see: a charming stranger, perhaps a little mysterious, but eager to contribute and learn their ways. She had practiced her introduction carefully, knowing how important first impressions were. If all went as planned, they'd never suspect she had arrived with any motive other than curiosity and goodwill. As the carriage came to a halt, Mina stepped out gracefully, smoothing her dress as she scanned her surroundings. A handful of villagers had gathered nearby, curious about the stranger who had just arrived in their sleepy village. She felt their eyes on her, some lingering a bit longer than others, especially the men. She offered a polite smile and a slight nod, aware that the first seed of her influence was being planted. A woman with a weathered face and kind eyes stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome, stranger," she said, her voice a mixture of warmth and caution. "We don't get many visitors here in Awara. What brings you to our little village?" Mina flashed a practiced smile, the kind that had opened doors and softened hearts more times than she could count. "Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm just a traveler, really passing through and hoping to learn a bit about your ways and your culture. I've always been fascinated by the stories I've heard of Awara." The woman's face softened, and the hint of suspicion in her eyes faded. "Well, you're welcome here. My name's Adama. If you need anything, feel free to ask." She glanced over her shoulder at the small crowd, as if seeking their approval, before gesturing to a young man standing nearby. "This is my son, Tunde. He can show you around if you'd like." Tunde stepped forward, clearly a bit flustered under Mina's gaze. He looked to be in his early 20s, tall and lean with a shy smile that suggested he wasn't used to strangers, let alone someone like Mina. She extended her hand, and he shook it awkwardly, his eyes flickering from her face to the ground. "I'd be honored to show you around," Missy trailed off, waiting for her name. "Mina," she replied smoothly, holding his gaze just long enough to make him blush. "Thank you, Tunde. I'd love a tour." They walked slowly through the village, with Tunde pointing out places of interest: the village square, the small market where vendors sold fresh produce and handmade goods, and the ancient well at the center of it all. Mina listened attentively, nodding at his explanations and asking questions about life in Awara. Each answer gave her a clearer picture of the village dynamics, from the roles of the elders to the routines of daily life. She noticed the respect in Tunde's voice whenever he mentioned Dayo, the village elder. It was clear Dayo was someone of great influence, perhaps even fear, among the villagers. Mina made a mental note. Dayo would be her target, the one who held the key to her plans here. She would have to approach him carefully, earn his trust, and get close enough to learn his secrets. As they reached the end of the tour, they arrived at a small inn where Mina would be staying. It was modest but clean, with a warm glow spilling from the windows and the faint smell of spices lingering in the air. Tunde hesitated, looking down at his feet before glancing up at her, an uncertain smile on his face. "I hope you like it here," he said, his voice a little softer. Awara may be small, but it's a good place with good people. Mina tilted her head, studying him. There was something endearing about his sincerity, his open admiration. She would have to be careful with Tundi. He was the kind of person who could make her forget, even briefly, the reasons she was here. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, feeling him tense under her touch. "Thank you, Tundi," she replied, her voice warm. "I think I'll like it here very much." With that, she turned and entered the inn, letting the door close softly behind her. She felt a thrill of satisfaction as she settled into her small room, her eyes drifting to the window overlooking the village square. The wheels of her plan were in motion, and her presence had already stirred curiosity. She had sensed it in the lingering glances, the whispered conversations as she passed, and the hesitant kindness in Adama's eyes. In a few days, they would all feel her influence. She would be the stranger who arrived and enchanted their village, the woman who brought change to their lives whether they wanted it or not. As the last light faded from the sky, Mina allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Awara was only beginning to know her, but soon enough, it would belong to her. The morning sun had barely risen when Mina stepped out into the village square. She had dressed simply, wearing a light-colored dress that matched the villagers' style yet accentuated her natural elegance. As she moved through the square, her eyes attentive, she noticed villagers glancing in her direction, their curiosity lingering from the day before. She didn't have to wait long to make her mark. A group of women had gathered near the well, balancing clay pots and baskets on their hips as they shared the latest village news. When Mina approached, they fell silent, eyeing her cautiously. "Good morning," Mina greeted with a warm smile, dipping her head politely. "I hope I'm not interrupting." One of the women, an older lady with a stern expression and weathered hands, regarded her with narrowed eyes. "You're the new one, aren't you?" Her tone held a mixture of interest and suspicion. "The traveler." Mina nodded, keeping her smile gentle. "Yes, I just arrived yesterday. I'm still learning my way around and hoping to meet everyone. I'm Mina." The woman's expression softened slightly as she introduced herself. "I'm Funmi. This here is Adiola, and that's Kemi." The other women gave polite nods, though their eyes continued to assess her carefully. "Thank you," Mina replied, her voice genuine. "You all have such a beautiful village. It's been a long time since I've felt this welcomed anywhere." Funmi's face softened, her guarded expression giving way to curiosity. "Well, it's not often we get visitors," she said, glancing at the others. "People here live simple lives. We don't see much of the world beyond Awara." Mina tilted her head thoughtfully. "Sometimes I envy that. I've traveled so much, and I feel like I've lost a part of myself along the way. Being here feels like finding something I didn't know I'd lost." The women exchanged glances, a hint of approval in their eyes. They seemed to relax, intrigued by the notion that a stranger could find comfort in their simple village life. Mina took this as her cue to shift the conversation. "I noticed the young man, Tunde, mentioned Dayo yesterday," Mina said, careful to keep her tone casual. "He must be a very respected leader here." The women's expressions changed, and Mina felt a spark of interest. Funmi nodded slowly, her eyes briefly flickering toward the center of the village, where the elder's home sat in plain view. "Dayo is someone who keeps things in order," Funmi replied, choosing her words carefully. "He's been good for the village, though some might say he has a firm hand." Mina filed that information away, noting the subtle tension in Funmi's voice. Dayo, it seemed, commanded respect but perhaps not love. This complexity suited Mina's purpose well. A powerful but disliked man would be easier to manipulate. As the women began to speak more freely, Mina asked questions about their lives and routines, listening attentively. She made sure to keep the focus on them, allowing each woman to speak and feeling their guard soften with each passing moment. She laughed when they laughed, nodded with understanding when they shared complaints, and praised their strength and wisdom at just the right moments. By the end of the conversation, the women had begun to warm to her, impressed by her attentiveness. Just as Mina was about to excuse herself, a group of young men carrying tools walked through the square, their voices loud and cheerful. Tundi was among them, leading the way with his easygoing smile. When he spotted Mina, he waved enthusiastically. "Mina, good morning," he called out, jogging over to join her. The women exchanged knowing looks, smirking at Tunde's obvious interest, but Mina simply smiled back, unfazed. She greeted him warmly, allowing him to fall into step beside her as the women drifted away. "I was just about to fetch water for the day," Mina said, lifting an empty clay jug she'd borrowed from the innkeeper. "Would you care to walk with me?" Tunde's face lit up, and he nodded eagerly. "Of course. The river isn't far." As they walked, Tunde spoke animatedly about his plans to repair the village bridge, which had been damaged by last season's floods. Mina listened attentively, noting how he seemed genuinely invested in the village's well-being. He spoke with pride, revealing a deep loyalty to Awara and a desire to improve it. When they reached the riverbank, Mina paused, setting down the jug and letting her gaze drift over the sparkling water. She felt the weight of Tunde's admiration, knowing she could turn it to her advantage. He seemed so genuine, so trusting, a perfect ally, or perhaps a pawn in her plan. She filled her jug slowly, watching the water swirl inside, reflecting on the conversation she'd had that morning. Each person she met seemed drawn to her, a stranger who brought a touch of the outside world yet admired their way of life. It was exactly the reaction she'd hoped for. As she straightened up, Mina caught Tunde watching her with a shy smile, his eyes brimming with admiration. He seemed on the verge of saying something, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm before he could speak. "Thank you, Tunde," she said, her voice soft, "for being so kind to me. It's rare to feel so welcomed. I'll be sure to remember it." Tunde flushed, smiling as he nodded. "It's easy to be kind to someone like you." Mina smiled back, feeling a thrill of satisfaction. The pieces of her plan were already falling into place. With each encounter, she wove herself deeper into the village's fabric, creating connections that would serve her purpose. And soon, when the time was right, she would make her move. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, a young boy arrived at the inn carrying a small, carefully wrapped bundle. He approached Mina, bowing slightly before handing it to her with both hands. "From Elder Dayo," the boy said softly, his eyes wide with curiosity. He lingered just a moment, studying her face, before hurrying off into the gathering dusk. Mina carefully unwrapped the bundle to reveal a finely woven cloth, embroidered with intricate patterns along the edges. Beneath it was a note, written in neat, deliberate strokes: "You are invited to join me for dinner tomorrow evening. I'd like to welcome you to Awara properly. Dayo." A smile played at the corners of Mina's lips. Dayo was not only wealthy and respected, but clearly a man of refinement. She recognized the cloth as one reserved for special occasions, a token often given by elders to signify respect and importance. Dayo was reaching out to her. Though he might have his suspicions, this invitation was also an acknowledgement of her presence in Awara and an opportunity to draw him closer. The next evening, as twilight bathed the village in soft, amber light, Mina prepared herself carefully. She chose a simple dress, one that blended with the village's modest style yet hinted at her own elegance. Her hair was pinned loosely, framing her face in soft curls. She didn't want to appear overly polished. This was about blending in while standing out just enough to keep Dayo intrigued. When she arrived at Dayo's home, a large structure at the village's heart, she was met by a young woman who escorted her inside. The house was modestly adorned, but Mina could tell by the quality of the furnishings and decorations that Dayo's wealth exceeded what he let on. Each item was carefully chosen, placed with precision. Dayo was a man who understood control. She was led to a long wooden table, where Dayo sat at the head, flanked by candles casting a warm glow across the room. He rose when he saw her, extending a hand with a slight smile. His presence was commanding, with an air of authority that seemed woven into his very being. "Mina," he greeted her, his voice low and measured. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I trust you found our village to your liking." "Very much," Elder Dayo," Mina replied, taking his hand in a gentle, respectful handshake. "Awara has been more welcoming than I could have hoped." He gestured for her to sit, watching her closely as she settled across from him. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Mina felt the weight of his gaze, aware that he was studying her, trying to read the intentions behind her friendly demeanor. As the meal began, Dayo spoke carefully, choosing his words as if he were piecing together a puzzle. "We don't often have strangers here," he said. "Awara is a place that values tradition, as I'm sure you've noticed." Mina nodded, keeping her expression open and receptive. "I can see that. It's rare to find a village so close-knit, so connected to its roots. It's something I admire." Dayo's lips curved slightly. "Admire, yes, but I wonder if someone like you, a traveler, could ever truly understand it." She caught the undertone of suspicion in his words and held his gaze calmly. "Perhaps not," she admitted, "but that doesn't mean I don't appreciate it. I came here to learn, to be a part of something lasting. My travels have taught me much, but I've never seen a place with such a deep sense of identity." Dayo leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. He seemed momentarily satisfied, yet a flicker of doubt remained in his eyes. "And what do you seek here in Awara, Mina? I can't imagine that someone as captivating as yourself would come here without purpose." Mina allowed a gentle smile, careful to keep her tone earnest. "Peace, Elder Dayo. I seek a place to rest, to reconnect with the simplicity I once knew. I've spent so much of my life moving from place to place, always searching for something. When I heard of Awara, I thought it might be a place where I could finally find that." Dayo regarded her with a penetrating stare, as though weighing her words. Finally, he nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. "Perhaps you will find it here," he said, his voice softer. "But peace comes at a price, Mina. Awara is not a place that opens easily to outsiders. Trust must be earned." "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. "I wouldn't expect otherwise. I only hope to prove myself worthy of that trust." Satisfied, Dayo gestured for the servants to bring the next course. As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter topics: the history of the village, stories of its founding, and the seasonal rituals that marked its calendar. Mina listened intently, nodding at appropriate moments, letting Dayo fill the silence with tales that revealed the pride and loyalty he felt for Awara. But she also sensed something else: a subtle protectiveness, an awareness that extended beyond his position as elder. Dayo was not merely a leader, he was the gatekeeper, the one who held the village's secrets and ensured that its way of life remained untainted. As the meal drew to a close, Mina thanked Dayo graciously, expressing her gratitude for his generosity. He escorted her to the door, pausing just as they reached the threshold. His hand lingered on her shoulder, his eyes serious. "Remember, Mina," he said quietly, "Awara is a place of loyalty and tradition. Those who come here with pure hearts are welcomed, but those who do not find themselves unwelcome." The warning was clear, but Mina kept her expression calm, smiling as she met his gaze. "Thank you, Elder Dayo. I will remember that." With a respectful nod, she left his home, her mind racing as she walked back to the inn. Dayo was clever, perhaps even cleverer than she had anticipated. He had tested her subtly, probing for any hint of deception. But Mina felt confident that she had passed his test. The first step had been taken. She had entered his circle, if only tentatively. And now, she thought with a thrill of anticipation, the real game could begin. As the days passed, Mina settled into village life with graceful ease, becoming a regular face in Awara's daily routines. She spent her mornings helping Adama with errands, chatting with the women at the well, and occasionally lending a hand in the village market. To the villagers, Mina was an eager learner, a foreigner enamored by their way of life. To Mina, each moment was an opportunity to observe, to listen, and to piece together the intricate social dynamics of Awara. But Mina's presence didn't go unnoticed by everyone. Although most of the villagers welcomed her openly, a few couldn't ignore the subtle changes she seemed to bring. For one, the men had grown unusually distracted. Mina's charm and effortless beauty were enough to turn heads, but it was her attentiveness and curiosity that held their attention. Conversations often shifted in her direction, and even those who claimed to be disinterested found themselves drawn to her. It wasn't long before whispers began to circulate. At first, the rumors were just murmurs in the marketplace, a few women gossiping about how Tunda's eyes seemed to follow Mina every time she walked by, or how the blacksmith's son, usually so focused on his work, had taken to lingering in the square just in case Mina passed. But soon, the whispers grew louder, and suspicion took root, especially among the women who watched their husbands and sons drift into Mina's orbit. One afternoon, while Mina was browsing cloth at a stall, she overheard two women nearby speaking in hushed voices. She pretended to examine the fabric, but her attention was fully on their conversation. "She's been here barely a week," one of the women said, her tone sharp. "Yet every man in the village acts like she's a rare jewel. Do they think we don't notice?" The other woman sighed. "It's unsettling, that's what it is. I've never seen Tunda so distracted. And now even Adiola's husband spends more time out of the house, claiming he has errands as if I don't know where he's going." Mina kept her expression neutral, continuing to examine the fabric, but inside she felt a flicker of satisfaction. Her presence was causing a stir, as she had intended, yet she also knew that such rumors, if left unchecked, could backfire. She couldn't afford to make enemies so soon, especially among the women who held sway over daily life in the village. She approached Adama later that day, carrying a basket of fresh produce she'd offered to help deliver. Adama greeted her warmly, but there was a slight tension in her smile, as if something weighed on her mind. "Adama," Mina began gently, "I hope I'm not causing any trouble by being here. I've noticed some unease among the villagers. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable." Adama hesitated, looking down at her hands. "It's nothing you've done, dear. It's just, well, Awara is a place where people notice everything. New faces, changes, even the smallest things, they don't go unnoticed. Some of the women are just protective." Mina nodded, adopting a humble expression. "I understand. I don't want to disrupt anything. I just wanted to find a place to belong, somewhere to feel connected. I suppose I didn't realize my presence would be such a distraction." Adama's face softened, and she placed a comforting hand on Mina's arm. "Don't worry. People will come around once they see you're here with good intentions. They just need time to adjust." Mina smiled gratefully, but her mind was already working. The village women's suspicions could be both a hurdle and a tool. She'd have to tread carefully, balancing her influence over the men while reassuring the women that she was no threat to their families. As the sun began to set, Mina decided to make a show of goodwill. She gathered her belongings and walked toward the well, where a small group of women were filling their buckets with water for the evening. She greeted them warmly and offered to help carry some of the heavier buckets. At first they seemed hesitant, but her genuine smile and light-hearted conversation soon melted their reserve. One of the women, Kemi, looked at Mina with a mix of curiosity and lingering suspicion. "You're different, you know," she said, not unkindly. "Not many outsiders care about our ways, but you seem interested." Mina nodded, keeping her tone earnest. "I am. Awara has such a beautiful way of life, and everyone has been so welcoming. I want to show my appreciation by understanding it, by being a part of it." The women exchanged glances, visibly softening as they began to warm to her. They laughed when she struggled to lift a particularly heavy bucket, and she joined in, making a self-deprecating joke that eased the tension further. By the time they returned to the village square, Mina felt the women's guarded stares shift into genuine smiles. They may still have their suspicions, but she had planted seeds of trust. She thanked them sincerely, offering small compliments about their resilience and strength, words that lifted their spirits and subtly reinforced her respect for their way of life. As she walked back to the inn that evening, Mina allowed herself a satisfied smile. She had diffused the rumors just enough to prevent outright hostility, while still keeping herself at the center of attention. The men's curiosity was intact, and now even the women saw her in a more favorable light. But she knew better than to grow complacent. The village might have relaxed its guard, but Dayo remained an obstacle. He was a silent observer, one who would not be easily swayed by her charm. She would have to be patient, carefully navigating the delicate balance of influence she was building in Awara. In the shadows, she could feel the currents of power shifting ever so subtly. With each passing day, her hold on Awara grew stronger. One evening, as Mina was preparing to retire to her room at the inn, she overheard a hushed conversation between two men seated in the corner of the common room. She paused, hidden by the shadows, her senses sharpening as their words drifted to her. "It's almost time," one of the men whispered. "Dayo will move the chest soon, just before the festival. You know he doesn't trust anyone with it." The second man nodded, his voice lowered even further. "I've heard he keeps it close, buried somewhere only he knows. They say it holds enough to secure the village's future for generations. Mina felt a spark of interest flare inside her. So the rumors were true. Dayo wasn't only a respected elder, he was also the quiet custodian of the village's fortune, a small fortune that could be her ticket to a life far from Awara. If she could gain his trust and discover where he kept his wealth, she could be gone before anyone knew it was missing. She waited until the men finished their drinks and left before slipping up to her room, her mind racing with possibilities. This knowledge was exactly what she'd been waiting for, an opportunity to speed up her plans. But she knew she'd have to be cautious. Dayo was sharp and had already shown hints of suspicion toward her. If she were too direct, he would see right through her. As she lay in bed that night, a plan began to take shape. She would need to get closer to Dayo, closer than she'd been able to so far. The coming festival would be her best chance. It was an event of significance, one that held deep meaning for the villagers. If she could use the festival to create a bond with him, she might gain his trust enough to learn where he hid his wealth. The next day, Mina began her preparations. She sought out Adama, who was busily stitching a new dress for the festival. Mina watched her work for a moment, admiring the intricate embroidery, before clearing her throat. "Adama, is there anything I can do to help with the festival preparation?" she asked, her tone light and eager. "I'd love to contribute, to truly feel a part of the village during this special time." Adama looked up, surprised but pleased by her offer. "You're kind to offer, Mina. We're always in need of extra hands, especially with the food and decorations. I'm sure the women would appreciate your help." Mina spent the following days fully immersing herself in the preparations. She worked alongside the other women, weaving garlands, gathering ingredients, and even learning the steps to one of the traditional dances. She poured herself into the work, not just to please the villagers, but to earn their trust. Every task she completed was another thread in the web she was weaving around Dayo. The women began to look at her with newfound respect, impressed by her dedication. Even the men, usually distracted by her beauty, saw her as more than just an outsider. She was becoming a part of Awara, someone who was not merely visiting but investing herself in their customs and celebrations. As the festival drew near, Mina noticed Dayo watching her with a new expression, a hint of approval, perhaps even admiration. He approached her one evening as she was arranging flowers in the village square, his footsteps soft yet purposeful. "Mina," he greeted her, his gaze thoughtful. "You've been working hard for our festival." "I didn't expect you to be so involved." She turned, meeting his eyes with a warm smile. "It's an honor to be part of something so meaningful, Elder Dayo. I've never experienced such a strong sense of community. It feels right." Dayo nodded, folding his hands behind his back as he studied her. "Few outsiders would bother with our traditions. You have surprised me, Mina. Perhaps I misjudged you." Mina felt a thrill of satisfaction. This was the opening she'd been waiting for, and she chose her next words carefully. "I understand. Trust isn't easy to come by, especially in a place as special as Awara. But I hope to earn it, to prove that I'm here with pure intentions." Dayo looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps you already have. I've seen how the villagers have come to respect you. You've done well, Mina." He turned to leave, but Mina felt a surge of boldness and called out after him. "Elder Dayo, would you allow me to accompany you to the festival as your guest? I would be honored to experience it through your eyes." Dayo paused, considering her request before nodding slowly. "Very well. I will call on you when it is time." As he walked away, Mina felt a sense of triumph. She had secured her place at Dayo's side for the festival, a position that would afford her the perfect opportunity to deepen his trust and gather the information she needed about the village fortune. She had become a fixture in the lives of Awara's people, woven herself into their traditions, and now, finally, she was closer than ever to her goal. That night, as she lay in bed, Mina allowed herself a small smile. The pieces were aligning perfectly. With each day, each carefully chosen word and action, she was moving closer to the life she had dreamed of. Soon, Awara's riches would be within her grasp. But she also knew the final steps would be the most dangerous. Dayo was observant, his loyalty to the village fierce, and one misstep could unravel everything she had worked for. She would need to be cautious, patient, and flawless in her execution. The opportunity was within reach, and now it was hers to take. The festival had arrived, and the village of Awara was alive with color, music, and the sounds of laughter echoing through the air. The sun had dipped low, casting a warm glow over the village as people gathered in the square, their faces alight with excitement. Mina, dressed in a simple but elegant dress adorned with flowers she had woven herself, waited near the edge of the square, her heart pounding with anticipation. True to his word, Dayo soon approached her. He wore a ceremonial robe adorned with intricate designs, a symbol of his status and authority. His eyes scanned the crowd before landing on her, and he nodded approvingly as she stepped forward to join him. "You look well prepared," he remarked, his voice calm but laced with something that almost resembled pride. "You've worked hard to make this festival a success." "Thank you, Elder Dayo," Mina replied, her tone respectful. "It's an honor to be part of it, especially as your guest." Dayo gave a slight nod, gesturing for her to walk beside him as they moved through the square. Villagers stepped aside to let them pass, offering respectful bows to Dayo and curious smiles to Mina. She could feel the weight of their gazes, a mixture of admiration and surprise, and she let it wash over her, reveling in her newfound place within the community. As they reached the heart of the square, Dayo turned to face her, his expression more serious. "Tonight is more than just a celebration," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "It's a reminder of our village's traditions, of the bonds that hold us together. You say you respect our ways, Mina, but words mean little without action." Mina's heart raced as she listened, realizing that this was more than just a simple festival invitation. Dayo was testing her, gauging the sincerity of her intentions. She met his gaze steadily, understanding that this moment could make or break her plan. "I understand, Elder Dayo," she replied softly. "If there's anything I can do to prove my loyalty to Awara, please tell me. I want nothing more than to show my respect for your customs." Dayo studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words. "There is one way," he said finally, "a task, one that requires trust and dedication. It may seem simple, but it's a sacred duty. You will join the night's watch over our village treasures, as we have done for generations." Mina's pulse quickened. This was the opportunity she had hoped for, a chance to get closer to the village wealth she sought. She kept her expression calm, nodding earnestly. "I would be honored to do so, Elder Dayo." Dayo's gaze lingered on her, his eyes searching for any trace of insincerity. "Very well," he said, his voice measured. "After the festivities, I will take you to the chamber. There, you will stand guard, alongside a few trusted villagers. Tonight, you will witness firsthand the responsibility we carry." Mina inclined her head respectfully, her mind already calculating her next steps. This test of loyalty would be her chance to learn where Dayo kept the village's fortune. She felt the thrill of victory close at hand, tempered only by the need to keep her composure. The festival carried on, with Mina and Dayo seated together as the villagers danced, sang, and shared stories around the fire. She listened attentively, laughing at the tales and joining in the applause, aware that each moment spent by Dayo's side solidified her status in the village. When the evening began to wind down and the crowd thinned, Dayo rose in motion for Mina to follow. He led her through a narrow path behind the main square, past the familiar well, and toward a small structure she hadn't noticed before. It was tucked away in the shadows, hidden from casual view. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit, its stone walls adorned with ancient carvings and symbols that seemed to glow in the firelight. In the center of the room sat a chest, modest in size yet clearly significant, bound with intricate metalwork and etched with symbols of protection. Dayo gestured to it, his voice low. "This chest holds more than material wealth," he said solemnly. "It represents the future of Awara, the prosperity of our children and their children. Protecting it is an honor, a duty that we do not take lightly." Mina nodded, feigning reverence as she took in the sight. The chest was smaller than she had imagined, but she knew it held the key to everything she desired. If she could gain access to it, her escape would be secure. But for now, she focused on maintaining her composure, not allowing her excitement to show. Dayo turned to her, his expression grave. "Tonight you stand as one of us. But remember, trust is fragile. One wrong move, one betrayal, and it is lost forever. Do you understand?" "Yes, Elder Dayo, she replied, her voice steady. I won't betray your trust. Dayo held her gaze a moment longer before nodding. Good, the others will be here soon to stand watch with you. I will return at dawn. With that, he left the chamber, leaving Mina alone with the chest and the weight of his words. She felt a surge of anticipation, knowing that this was her chance to study the chest up close, to memorize the details and plot her next move. But she also knew she couldn't act hastily. Any sign of suspicion, and all her work would crumble. Soon, 2 other villagers joined her in the chamber, each offering her a respectful nod before taking their positions on either side of the chest. They spoke little, their focus solemn, and Mina mirrored their silence, letting the hours pass in quiet observation. As the night wore on, Mina's thoughts raced. She now had the information she needed: the location of the chest, its size, and the timing of the watch. But executing her plan would require precision and patience. One wrong move could expose her, turning the village's admiration into wrath. When dawn finally broke, Dayo returned, casting a satisfied glance at her and the others. Well done, he said quietly, his approval evident. You've proven your dedication, Mina. Mina inclined her head, relief and triumph mingling within her. She had passed Dayo's test, earning not only his trust but also a place within the village's inner circle. Her position was secure, and her path to the fortune was clear. Now, all she had to do was wait for the right moment to strike. The days after the festival felt different in Awara. Mina could sense it in the way villagers greeted her, their smiles warmer and their nods more respectful. Her role in the night watch had earned her a newfound respect, and Dayo's approval had granted her an almost untouchable status. But with that reverence came an undercurrent of tension, a feeling that something beneath the surface was about to break. As Mina went about her day, she noticed the men's attentions growing bolder, their admiration no longer confined to subtle glances. Tunde, especially, had become more open with his affections, often lingering by her side, offering to carry her baskets or accompany her on errands. She allowed it, knowing that his attachment to her could be useful. The deeper his feelings, the more leverage she'd have when the time came. But the other men noticed Tunde's attentions as well. One morning, while Mina was walking to the market with Tunde, they passed a group of young men by the well. One of them, Adiola's eldest son, made a remark just loud enough to carry across the square. Must be nice to be so helpful, Tunde, he called out, his tone mocking. You're practically her shadow. Tunde stiffened beside her, his jaw clenched. Mina glanced at him, seeing the flash of anger in his eyes. She gently placed a hand on his arm, giving him a calming smile. Ignore them, she whispered. They're just teasing. But it didn't end there. Over the next few days, Mina sensed a growing divide among the men of the village. While Tunde continued to offer his help and companionship, others seemed to resent his closeness to her. They watched him with barely concealed disdain, their expressions darkening whenever he was near her. Even some of the married men, who had once greeted her with friendliness, had become distant, their wives casting her wary looks as if she were some kind of threat. One afternoon, while she was helping Adama in the kitchen, a quiet yet bitter conversation drifted through the open window. Mina leaned closer to hear, pretending to arrange the vegetables while keeping her focus on the voices outside. I'm telling you, that woman is causing trouble, a man muttered, his tone sharp. Tunde's a good lad, but he's blind to her charms, and it's not just him, half the men in the village have forgotten themselves around her. Another voice, one Mina recognized as Kemi's husband, replied with equal frustration. It's true. She's got them wrapped around her finger. It's unnatural. Awara was peaceful before she came. A thrill ran through Mina, mixed with a twinge of unease. She had known her presence would stir emotions, but this level of resentment was something she hadn't entirely anticipated. While it was useful to have the men's attention, it was also becoming a potential risk. If this tension escalated, it could turn the village against her, undoing all the trust she had so carefully built. Adama seemed to sense the growing unrest as well. That evening, as they prepared dinner, she hesitated before speaking, her voice gentle but concerned. Mina, I've noticed some tension among the menfolk lately. They've been acting differently since the festival. Mina looked up, feigning surprise. Have they? I hadn't noticed anything unusual. Adama gave her a long, assessing look, then sighed. Perhaps not, but be careful, Mina. Sometimes admiration can turn bitter. I don't want to see you caught in the middle of any misunderstandings. Mina nodded, smiling appreciatively at Adama's concern. Thank you for the advice, Adama. I would never want to cause trouble here. This village has been so kind to me. Despite her reassurances, Mina knew she needed to address this shift carefully. The villagers' suspicions were rising, and she couldn't afford to become a target of resentment. That evening, she sought out Tunde, catching him as he finished his work near the fields. Tunde, she called softly, walking up to him as the sun began to set. I wanted to thank you for all the help you've given me. I know some people have been noticing our friendship, and I wouldn't want you to face any trouble because of me. Tunde's expression softened, and he shook his head firmly. I don't care what anyone thinks, Mina. You've been nothing but kind to me. Let them talk, they don't know you like I do. Mina smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're a true friend, Tunde. But sometimes even friendship can cause misunderstandings. Maybe it would be best if we kept a bit of distance, just for a while. I wouldn't want you to face any trouble on my behalf. Tunde's face fell, but he nodded reluctantly. If that's what you think is best, I understand. She could see the disappointment in his eyes, and a part of her almost regretted the distance she was putting between them. But she knew it was necessary. She had to maintain her position without inflaming the resentment building among the villagers. As much as Tunde's loyalty was valuable to her, she couldn't allow him to become a weakness in her plan. Over the next few days, she made a subtle effort to pull back, letting Tunde go about his tasks without her usual requests for help. She engaged less with the other men, focusing more on the women and the elders, redirecting the village's attention. Slowly, the whispers began to quiet, and the men's jealousy faded into the background, though Mina could still sense a lingering tension in the air. Dayo, however, seemed to notice the shift in her behavior. One evening, he approached her as she helped with the village's preparations for the next month's harvest. His gaze was sharp, his voice low. I see you've taken a step back, Mina, he remarked, his words carrying a weight of observation. It's wise of you to avoid unnecessary attention. The villagers are quick to judge, especially when they see someone they don't fully understand. Mina met his gaze, choosing her words carefully. I want to respect your village's ways, Elder Dayo. I would never want to cause discomfort. Dayo nodded approvingly. It's good that you understand that. Awara is a place of harmony, but balance is easily disrupted. You have a charm, Mina, and charms can be dangerous if wielded carelessly. His words, though approving, held a subtle warning. Mina inclined her head respectfully, acknowledging his insight. I appreciate your guidance, Elder Dayo. I will be mindful. As he walked away, Mina felt a mixture of relief and wariness. Dayo was astute, always watching, always aware. She had passed his test, but he would not allow her to overstep her bounds. The tension may have lessened for now, but she knew the peace was fragile, a thin veil that could tear at the slightest misstep. With each passing day, Mina's path grew narrower, her moves more calculated. She had gained Dayo's trust, but the villagers' suspicion loomed in the background, a reminder that her plan, if not executed perfectly, could unravel in an instant. The night was quiet, the village steeped in silence as Mina lay awake in her small room at the inn. The flickering light of a candle danced across the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to echo her thoughts. She should have felt triumphant her plans were unfolding as she had envisioned, and Dayo's trust was nearly within her grasp. But tonight, her mind was heavy, her heart troubled by a feeling she couldn't quite shake. For days, she had been meticulously working her way into the villagers' lives, calculating each word and gesture to ensure she stayed in their good graces. Yet with every step forward, there was a faint but growing sense of unease, as if she were inching toward the edge of something unknown. The festival, the night watch, Dayo's stern but approving words, all of it had been carefully orchestrated, yet it felt increasingly fragile. She shifted under the thin blanket, letting her eyes wander to the ceiling, where shadows formed familiar shapes. She thought of Tunde's disappointed face when she had asked him to distance himself, the way his shoulders had slumped as he walked away. His genuine kindness and loyalty had touched her in a way she hadn't anticipated, stirring something within her that she had long buried. The villagers, too, had begun to trust her, accepting her into their world with open arms. And yet, the deeper she delved into their lives, the more she felt the weight of their expectations and their vulnerability. It wasn't just a game to them, it was real. These were lives she was toying with, people who had welcomed her without truly knowing her. Mina shook her head, frustrated with her own thoughts. She reminded herself of her purpose, of the dream she'd carried for so long. She was here for a reason, to secure a future she deserved. Her life had been a series of struggles and disappointments, a relentless search for stability and worth. This was her chance to finally break free, to rise above the circumstances that had kept her down for so long. But as she lay there, her mind kept returning to the faces of the villagers, the warmth in their eyes as they shared stories by the fire, the laughter that filled the air during the festival. For the first time, Mina found herself questioning the path she had chosen, wondering if there was a way to achieve her goals without leaving ruin in her wake. She closed her eyes, willing herself to ignore these pangs of doubt. Regret was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had come too far, invested too much to let herself falter now. Yet, as much as she tried to silence the voice within her, it grew louder, pressing against her resolve. The next morning, as she walked through the village, she felt the weight of her inner conflict pressing down on her. She greeted the villagers with her usual warmth, but their faces seemed sharper, their voices clearer, as if her conscience had suddenly made her aware of each person's significance. She noticed the laughter of children playing in the square, the proud smiles of mothers watching their sons, the firm handshakes exchanged by the men after a day's work. This was more than a village, it was a community, bound by trust and tradition. Just as she passed by the well, Adama approached, carrying a basket of herbs. She smiled at Mina, gesturing for her to walk alongside. "You seem quiet today, Mina," she observed gently. "Are you well?" Mina forced a smile, nodding. "Yes, just a little tired, I suppose." Adama studied her, her eyes filled with the same warmth and concern that had made Mina feel so at home in Awara. "You know, you've done so much for us in such a short time. It's as if you've always belonged here. The village has been blessed by your presence." Mina's heart clenched at the words, a flicker of guilt flaring up. She forced herself to smile, thanking Adama, but her voice felt hollow. It was one thing to be a stranger passing through, but to hear that they saw her as one of their own, someone who belonged, that was almost unbearable. As they continued walking, Mina noticed Tunde approaching, his face lighting up as he spotted her. He greeted her warmly, his eyes filled with the same unguarded admiration he'd always shown. She felt a pang, remembering how she had asked him to keep his distance, yet here he was, as loyal as ever. "Mina," he began, "I've been meaning to ask after the harvest. We usually hold a small celebration, I thought. Maybe you'd like to join us." His invitation was simple, genuine, yet it struck Mina with unexpected force. She looked at him, seeing the hope in his eyes, and felt a surge of guilt. She had used his loyalty to her advantage, knowing that he saw her as more than just a visitor. She wanted to tell him no, to avoid any deeper ties, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself nodding. "I'd like that, Tunde." His face lit up, and Mina felt a fleeting warmth in her chest, a momentary reprieve from the weight she carried. Yet, even as she agreed, she knew it would only complicate things further. Her growing connection with Tunde, with Adama, with the villagers, these bonds had started to blur the line between her plan and the life she was pretending to live. That evening, as she sat alone in her room, she let herself acknowledge her doubts fully for the first time. She was on the verge of a decision that would alter the lives of everyone around her, a decision that, once made, could not be undone. She thought of the trust they had placed in her, the openness with which they had welcomed her into their world, and she thought of what it would mean to betray that trust, to leave them with nothing after all they had given her. For a brief, fleeting moment, she wondered if she could turn back, if there was a way to achieve her dreams without tearing apart the world of those who had shown her kindness. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew it was impossible. She had come too far, made too many promises to herself. She had to follow through. As the candle burned low, casting its final flickers of light across her room, Mina resolved to bury her doubts, to push forward with the plan she had so carefully crafted. The village might see her as one of their own, but she knew better. She was here for a purpose, and she would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with the scent of the harvest in the air. Villagers bustled about, preparing for the coming season, their faces bright with anticipation for the celebration that would follow. Mina moved among them, her demeanor calm and focused, her mind set on the steps she would need to take. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the point where she would finally put her plan into motion. She had spent weeks earning the trust of the villagers, becoming woven into the fabric of Awara's daily life. She had gained their respect, their friendship, even their admiration. But now, all of that was about to serve its true purpose. With each passing day, her access to Dayo's inner circle had grown, and she knew he saw her as someone who shared the village's values, someone committed to their prosperity. She would use that trust to her advantage, using the harvest festivities as her cover. After breakfast, Mina made her way to Dayo's home, her steps steady but her heart racing. She had prepared her words carefully, each sentence designed to open the door to the opportunity she needed. When she arrived, Dayo greeted her warmly, his eyes reflecting a trust she had worked so hard to cultivate. "Mina, come in," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I trust you're excited for the celebration. It's one of the most important events in Awara." She nodded, offering a polite smile. "Yes, Elder Dayo, I've come to love the village traditions, and it's an honor to be included in something so meaningful. I wanted to speak with you, actually. I'd like to offer my help in any way I can. I know the harvest requires a lot of preparation, and I'd be grateful to assist." Dayo looked at her, a glimmer of appreciation in his eyes. "That's generous of you, Mina. We could use more hands in the storage area, where the harvest offerings are kept. Would you be willing to take on that responsibility?" Mina's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral, her voice steady. "Of course, Elder Dayo. I would be honored to help protect what's so precious to Awara." Satisfied with her response, Dayo nodded. "Very well. I'll introduce you to the others on watch. You'll work together to ensure everything remains secure during the festivities. Awara's prosperity depends on this harvest, and we trust you to be vigilant." The sincerity in his tone nearly made her falter, but she quickly regained her composure. This was exactly the role she had hoped for, a position that would allow her close proximity to the village's wealth. She left Dayo's home with a sense of triumph tempered by the growing weight of her guilt. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. She was too close to achieving her goal. Later that evening, as the village prepared for the harvest celebration, Mina made her way to the storage area, where she met the other villagers on watch. Among them were Tunde and two older men she had seen around the village, each nodding in greeting as she joined them. She could feel Tunde's eyes lingering on her, his quiet admiration evident even as they prepared for their task. They took turns guarding the storage area, ensuring that nothing was disturbed as the festivities carried on in the square. The sounds of laughter and music drifted through the night air, a stark contrast to the stillness of their post. As the others rotated their watch shifts, Mina remained alert, her mind racing with the details of her plan. When her turn finally came to stand alone, she took a deep breath, scanning her surroundings. She would have only a few minutes to act, without drawing suspicion, a small window to execute the move she'd been preparing for weeks. She knew exactly where Dayo's fortune was kept within the storage area, hidden beneath layers of grain sacks and other offerings. Her hands moved quickly, retrieving a small pouch she'd hidden in her dress. She filled it with a modest portion of the wealth, just enough to ensure her escape but not enough to make the theft immediately obvious. As she secured the pouch, footsteps echoed outside, signaling that her shift was about to end. She quickly adjusted the sacks to look undisturbed, wiping her hands and calming her breathing. Tunde appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up when he saw her. "All quiet?" he asked, stepping inside. Mina nodded, forcing a relaxed smile. "All quiet. It's been an honor to be part of this, to help protect what's important to Awara." Tunde's expression softened. "The village is lucky to have you, Mina. We all feel that way." I feel that way." Her heart twisted at his words, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. "Thank you, Tunde. That means a lot to me." He gave her a shy smile, lingering for a moment before stepping back to take his place. Mina left the storage area, her mind racing. She had taken only a small amount, but she knew it would be enough to secure her future. Now all she needed was the right moment to slip away, to disappear before anyone could question her absence. As she walked back to the celebration, the sounds of laughter and joy filled her ears, a stark reminder of the lives she was about to disrupt. The villagers trusted her, counted on her, yet she would be leaving them with less than they had before. But she couldn't let herself think about that now. She had made her choice long ago, and there was no turning back. The festivities continued late into the night, but Mina remained on the edge, her eyes scanning the crowd, waiting for an opportunity to leave unnoticed. She watched as Dayo laughed with the elders, as the villagers danced, oblivious to the change that would await them come morning. As the celebration reached its peak, Mina took a final look at the faces of those who had trusted her, who had welcomed her into their world without question. She felt a pang of regret but forced herself to remain resolute. She had come too far to be held back by sentiment. When the moment finally came, she slipped away, blending into the shadows, the pouch of stolen wealth hidden securely under her cloak. She moved quickly, her heart racing as she made her way toward the edge of the village, where the trees would cover her escape. She didn't look back, didn't allow herself a final glance at the village that had shown her so much kindness. As she crossed the threshold into the forest, the weight of her actions settled over her. She was finally free to pursue the life she had dreamed of. But as she walked deeper into the darkness, the echo of laughter from the village lingered in her mind, a reminder of the trust she had betrayed, a shadow that would follow her no matter where she went. Mina's footsteps were silent on the forest floor as she moved farther from the village, her mind racing with the thrill of what she'd just done. The pouch of wealth felt heavy beneath her cloak, pressing against her side as a tangible reminder of her accomplishment. She was free now, unburdened by the ties that had held her down, or so she thought. But as the first glimmer of dawn crept through the trees, she heard distant voices. Her heart skipped a beat, and she crouched low, peering through the dense underbrush. Through the faint morning light, she could make out figures moving along the path, villagers, grouped together, searching the forest. Her heart began to pound. Had they already discovered the theft? Quickly, she adjusted her cloak to hide the pouch more securely, then edged farther into the trees. But as she took her next step, a branch snapped underfoot, echoing through the stillness of the early morning. "Did you hear that?" a voice called out, sharp with suspicion. "Over there." Mina's pulse quickened. She ducked behind a large tree, pressing herself against its rough bark as the footsteps grew closer. She held her breath, praying they would pass without noticing her. But just as she thought she was safe, a familiar voice called out. "Mina." She froze. It was Tunde. Slowly, she stepped out from behind the tree, her gaze meeting his. Tunde's face was a mixture of shock and confusion as he took in her disheveled appearance, the cloak wrapped tightly around her, and the guilty look in her eyes. Behind him, several other villagers stood watching, their expressions darkening as they pieced together what was happening. "Tunde," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not what it looks like." He shook his head, hurt and disbelief clear on his face. "Mina, what have you done? We trusted you. I trusted you." Mina's heart twisted at his words, the weight of his disappointment hitting her harder than she'd expected. She had prepared herself for the villagers' anger, but not for the pain in Tunde's eyes, the betrayal etched into every line of his face. For a brief moment, she felt the urge to explain, to tell him why she had done this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she took a step back, gripping the pouch tightly. "I had no choice," she said, her voice trembling. "You wouldn't understand." Tunde's gaze hardened. "Then explain it to us, Mina. Tell us why you betrayed everything and everyone who welcomed you with open arms." The other villagers murmured in agreement, their voices low and filled with resentment. Mina could feel the tension building around her, the weight of their betrayal turning into anger. She glanced around, her mind racing for a way out, but every path seemed blocked by the faces of those who had once called her a friend. Suddenly, a figure pushed through the group, and Dayo appeared, his eyes sharp and cold as they locked onto hers. He looked at her with an expression that was neither surprise nor anger, but a profound disappointment that seemed to pierce through her defenses. "So, it was true," he said quietly. "I had hoped I was wrong." Mina's throat tightened, the words of defense she'd prepared vanishing under his gaze. She opened her mouth to speak, but he held up a hand, silencing her. "Nothing you say can undo what you've done, Mina," he continued, his voice steady and calm. "You came to our village, claiming you sought peace, friendship, a place to belong, and we believed you. I believed you." She felt herself shrinking under the weight of his words, her confidence crumbling. She had thought she could handle their reactions, that she could simply slip away without looking back. But standing here, facing the anger and disappointment of the people she had deceived, she realized just how deeply she had entangled herself in their lives. Dayo took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Do you even understand what you've taken from us? This wealth was meant to protect our future, to ensure the prosperity of generations to come. You've stolen more than coins, Mina. You've stolen our trust, our faith in each other." The words struck her like a blow, each one chipping away at the resolve she had built around herself. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them her side of the story, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing she could say would change the betrayal she had committed. Tunde stepped closer, his voice raw with emotion. "Mina, I thought you were different. I thought you cared about this village, about us, but I see now I was wrong." Mina's vision blurred as she looked at him, the ache in her chest almost unbearable. She had come here with a single goal, a plan that had been clear and unyielding. But standing here, facing the pain in Tunde's eyes, the anger in Dayo's, she felt the weight of her choices in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. But even as she spoke them, she knew they meant nothing. Apologies couldn't mend the damage she had done. Dayo's gaze remained cold. "Sorry will not return what you've taken." He turned to the other villagers who stood waiting, their eyes hard. "We must decide what to do with her. Mina came here as a guest, but she has betrayed us as an enemy." The villagers murmured their agreement, voices filled with resentment. Mina's heart pounded as she realized the gravity of her situation. She had expected to leave Awara behind, to disappear with their wealth and her freedom intact. But now she was trapped, her escape cut off by the very people she had deceived. Dayo's gaze returned to her, his voice unyielding. "Mina, you will remain in the village under our watch until we decide your fate. There will be no more deceit, no more hiding." She nodded numbly, her mind struggling to process what had happened. She had always known this plan was risky, that it could end badly if she were discovered, but she had never truly believed she would face the consequences. As the villagers closed in around her, leading her back toward Awara, Mina felt the full weight of her betrayal settle over her. She had come here seeking freedom, but instead she had bound herself to a fate she couldn't escape. The village, once her haven, had become her prison. And now, all she could do was wait for their judgment. The sun rose slowly over Awara, casting an orange glow across the village square, where the villagers had gathered in tense silence. Mina stood at the center, her hands bound loosely with a thick rope, a physical reminder of the betrayal she had committed. Her head was lowered, her gaze fixed on the dusty ground, unwilling to meet the accusing eyes surrounding her. She felt their anger, their hurt, like a tangible weight pressing down on her. Dayo stood a few feet away, his expression somber, as he addressed the crowd. His voice carried a mixture of authority and sorrow, the words measured and deliberate. "We welcomed Mina as one of our own," he began, his gaze sweeping over the villagers, each face reflecting his disappointment. "She came to us as a stranger, but we trusted her. We opened our homes, our hearts, and in return she took advantage of our kindness." A murmur ran through the crowd, the villagers nodding in agreement, their anger simmering beneath the surface. Mina felt the intensity of their gaze, and for the first time she understood the true weight of her actions. These people had trusted her, offered her a place in their community, and she had betrayed that trust for her own gain. Dayo turned to face her, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Mina, you owe us an explanation. Why did you do this? Why did you take what wasn't yours?" Mina hesitated, struggling to find the right words. She wanted to defend herself, to explain the desperation that had driven her, but she knew that no explanation could erase the pain she had caused. She raised her head slowly, meeting Dayo's gaze with a mixture of shame and defiance. I thought I could find freedom," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I thought if I had enough, I could leave behind the life I never wanted, escape the chains of my past. I came here hoping to start fresh, but I needed more. I thought I could take a small portion, just enough to secure my future. Dayo's expression remained unchanged, his eyes sharp with disappointment. So, you used us. You thought so little of our trust that you would rob us and leave us to deal with the loss. You took what was meant for the future of our village, for our children. Mina's chest tightened at his words, each one piercing her defenses. I didn't think it would hurt anyone. I thought I could slip away quietly, and no one would even notice. I only took a small amount. A small amount, one of the elders interrupted, his voice laced with disbelief. You stole from the heart of our village, from the prosperity of every man, woman, and child here. Tundi stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. We cared for you, Mina. I cared for you, and you threw it all away for a handful of coins. Mina's voice caught in her throat as she looked at him, the full weight of his disappointment crashing over her. Tunde, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. He shook his head, his expression hardening. But you did hurt us, Mina. You hurt all of us, and now we have to decide what to do with you. The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder, filled with anger and frustration. Mina felt a surge of fear as she realized the severity of her situation. She had expected anger, perhaps even banishment, but the collective resentment of the villagers was sharper than she had anticipated. Dayo raised a hand, silencing the crowd, his gaze never leaving her. The people of Awara have spoken. You came here as a stranger, and you will leave here as one, forever unwelcome among us. But first, we must decide the manner of your departure. A young woman in the crowd spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. Let her feel the pain she caused. Let her know the weight of betrayal. Mina felt a wave of panic rising within her. Please, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I know what I did was wrong. I lost sight of everything. But I am sorry. Truly I am. Dayo shook his head, his face a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Regret means little after the damage has been done. Words cannot undo what you've stolen, Mina. Your apology may be sincere, but it changes nothing. The villagers nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the weight of their shared pain. Mina felt the hopelessness of her situation settle over her, a suffocating reminder of her betrayal. She had taken advantage of their trust, and now she was alone, with no one to turn to, no one to defend her. Tunde stepped forward again, his voice low but firm. There is a way for you to repay us, Mina. If you are truly sorry, if you truly understand the pain you've caused, then prove it. Return what you took, and leave this village, never to return. Mina hesitated, the thought of giving up the wealth she had risked so much to obtain sending a wave of resentment through her, but as she looked at the faces surrounding her, at the people she had deceived and hurt, she knew she had no other choice. The wealth was meaningless now, a hollow prize in the face of the damage she had done. With trembling hands, she reached into her cloak and pulled out the pouch, holding it out to Dayo. He took it from her, his expression unreadable, before turning back to the villagers. She has returned what she took, he announced, but the trust she has broken cannot be so easily mended. Mina will leave Awara at dawn. She will be escorted to the edge of the village, and from that moment she will be a stranger to us. Mina felt the finality of his words settle over her, a cold reminder that her time in Awara was over. The villagers began to disperse, their faces a mixture of relief and sorrow. She watched them go, feeling the weight of her actions press down on her like a stone. She had wanted freedom, but instead she had found herself trapped by her own choices. As the square emptied, Tunde lingered for a moment, his gaze lingering on her one last time. Goodbye, Mina, he said quietly, his voice filled with a sadness that cut through her like a blade. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the empty square, surrounded by the echoes of what she had lost. Mina sat alone in her small room at the inn, her belongings packed into a single, worn bag beside her. The faint sounds of the village drifted through the window, children playing, mothers calling, the quiet hum of life continuing as though she had never been a part of it. She felt hollow, the weight of her actions pressing down on her like a physical burden. At dawn, Dayo would escort her to the edge of the village, and from that moment on, she would be in exile, forbidden from ever returning to Awara. She had been so close to securing her future, so close to taking control of her life. But now, all she had gained was a memory of what could have been, tainted by the bitterness of her own betrayal. There was a knock on her door. She looked up, half expecting to see Dayo or one of the other elders come to enforce her departure early. Instead, it was Adama, the woman who had been her first friend in the village, the one who had welcomed her with open arms. Adama's face was lined with sadness, her expression a mixture of disappointment and pity. "Mina," she said softly, stepping into the room. "I came to see if you needed anything before you leave." Mina's throat tightened as she looked at Adama. The memories of their shared laughter, the quiet conversations they had had in the evenings, all crashing over her like a wave. She swallowed hard, struggling to find her voice. I don't need anything, Adama," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. For everything." Adama's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, her hand reaching out to rest gently on Mina's shoulder. "I know you are, child. I believe you are. But sorrow cannot undo what has been done." Mina nodded, her heart aching at the gentleness in Adama's words. "I never meant to hurt anyone, I thought. I thought I could take a small piece, and no one would notice. I was only thinking of myself." Adama sighed, looking down at her hands. "Perhaps you thought you were only taking a small piece, but trust, once broken, cannot be so easily repaired. You may think it was just a bit of coin, but to us, it was something far more precious. It was a piece of the future, a symbol of the hope we hold for those who will come after us." Mina lowered her gaze, shame and regret coursing through her. She could feel the sting of tears at the edges of her vision, but she forced them back, unwilling to show weakness now, after everything she had done. "Will they ever forgive me?" she whispered, almost to herself. Adama looked at her for a long moment before replying. "Perhaps in time they will come to understand, but forgiveness is a journey, Mina, and it is not something you can demand or even expect. The pain you caused will linger, like a wound that takes its time to heal." Mina nodded, a sense of finality settling over her. She understood now that forgiveness was something she might never receive, and that it was a consequence she would have to carry with her. Adama gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder before turning to leave, her voice quiet. "Goodbye, Mina. May you find peace wherever you go." As the door closed behind Adama, Mina sat in the silence, the emptiness of the room mirroring the emptiness inside her. She had lost everything, not just the wealth she had sought, but the community she had begun to cherish, the people who had offered her a home. And now, all that remained was the harsh reality of her actions. The night passed slowly, each hour stretching into eternity as she waited for dawn. She lay on the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events that had led her here. She remembered Tunde's smile, the warmth in his eyes as he had looked at her, the hope he had held that she might be someone he could trust. She remembered Dayo's words, his quiet disappointment, and the pride he had felt in the village's traditions. She had betrayed all of them, shattered the trust they had placed in her, and now she was left with nothing but the weight of her mistakes. When dawn finally arrived, she gathered her bag, took one last look around the room, and stepped outside. The village was quiet, the early morning light casting a soft glow over the familiar streets. Dayo stood waiting for her near the edge of the square, his expression somber but resolute. Without a word, she joined him, her footsteps slow and heavy as they walked toward the edge of Awara. The path felt longer than she remembered, each step a reminder of the connections she had severed, the friendships she had discarded. Villagers watched from a distance, their faces unreadable, their silence a testament to the hurt she had caused. When they reached the boundary of the village, Dayo stopped, turning to face her one last time. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and finality. "Mina," he said quietly, "I hope you understand the cost of what you've done. Awara trusted you and you used that trust for your own gain. But you have a chance now to find a new path. I hope, for your sake, that you use it wisely." Mina nodded, swallowing hard as she met his gaze. "I'm sorry, Elder Dayo. I truly am." He gave a slight nod, his face softening just a fraction. "Then let that sorrow guide you, Mina. Let it remind you of what truly matters." With that, he turned and walked back toward the village, leaving her standing alone at the boundary. She watched him go, her heart aching with the knowledge that this was her final goodbye, that she would never again walk the paths of Awara or see the faces of the people she had come to care for. As she turned and began walking away, the weight of her actions settled over her like a shadow, a reminder of the life she had chosen and the price she had paid. She had come to Awara seeking freedom, seeking a new life. But all she had found was the painful truth of her own choices and the realization that some losses could never be undone. And so, with her bag over her shoulder and her heart heavy, Mina walked into the unknown, carrying the memory of Awara with her, a memory forever tinged with regret. The path stretched endlessly before Mina, winding through forests and across fields as she put mile after mile between herself and Awara. Each step was heavy, weighed down by memories she could not escape, and as the distance grew, so did the emptiness inside her. She had spent her life chasing freedom, security, a place to belong, but now that she was truly alone, she found herself haunted by what she had left behind. The first night she set up camp near a small stream, her bag as her pillow, the stars her only companions. She had barely eaten, her appetite diminished by the ache in her chest. She lay there, staring up at the sky, the silence pressing in on her, amplifying the thoughts she had tried to ignore. Faces flashed through her mind: Tundi's hopeful smile, Adama's gentle warmth, Dayo's solemn gaze. She could still hear their voices, the quiet laughter they had shared, the kindness they had shown her without reservation. She had thought herself above it all, certain that she could take what she needed and move on without looking back. But now, with nothing but the night around her, she realized how deeply they had touched her, how much she had come to care for them. Regret gnawed at her, a persistent ache that refused to fade. She had thought herself clever, careful, able to play whatever role was necessary to get what she wanted. But she had underestimated the weight of betrayal, the way it clung to her like a shadow. The villagers' faces, etched with disappointment and hurt, were seared into her memory, a reminder that her actions had consequences beyond her own ambition. As dawn approached, she rose slowly, her movements sluggish as if her very bones carried the burden of her choices. She continued walking, her pace slower now, her mind churning with memories she couldn't escape. She recalled the moments she had shared with Tunde, his loyalty and trust, his willingness to stand by her even when others doubted. She had betrayed him, shattered the faith he had placed in her, and now, that loss felt sharper than any punishment the villagers could have inflicted. On the third day she reached a small town. Exhausted and weary, she found a quiet corner in the market square, watching people go about their lives, each face a reminder of what she had lost. She had money now, enough to start fresh, to buy whatever she needed. But as she held the coins in her hand, they felt cold, empty, a hollow prize for the sacrifices she had made. She thought back to her initial plan, the confidence with which she had entered Awara, certain that she could manipulate the villagers, take what she needed, and move on. But the reality had proven far different. She had grown attached, become entangled in their lives, and now she was left with the consequences of that attachment. The wealth she had once coveted felt meaningless, its weight far lighter than the burden of her guilt. Days passed, each one blending into the next as she wandered from village to village, never staying long, her heart unable to find rest. She often thought about returning to Awara, to beg for forgiveness, to try and make amends. But each time she reminded herself of the finality of Dayo's words, the irrevocable nature of her exile. She was a stranger to them now, her name forgotten, her presence erased. One evening, as she sat by a fire in an unfamiliar village, an old woman joined her, settling beside her with a knowing smile. "You look lost, child," the woman said, her voice gentle, "carrying a burden too heavy for one soul to bear." Mina looked up, surprised by the woman's perceptiveness. She hesitated, then nodded, unable to keep the pain from her eyes. "I made a mistake," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could take what I needed and leave, but I hurt people who didn't deserve it." The woman nodded, her gaze kind and understanding. "We all make mistakes, child. The question is what you choose to do with the regret that follows. Will you let it fester, or will you let it change you?" Mina looked down, the woman's words stirring something deep within her. She had been running from her actions, avoiding the full weight of her guilt. But now, She realized that perhaps this pain was a lesson, a reminder of the path she had chosen and the people she had left behind. "What if it's too late?" she asked, her voice tinged with despair. "What if there's no way to make it right?" The woman placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, her expression filled with wisdom. "Sometimes we cannot undo the past, but we can choose a different path for the future. Regret is a powerful teacher if you allow it to be. Learn from it, and perhaps you will find a way to heal." Mina nodded slowly, the woman's words resonating within her. She had spent so much of her life focused on what she wanted, what she needed, that she had lost sight of the cost of those desires. But perhaps there was a way forward, a path that didn't involve betrayal or manipulation. The woman patted her shoulder and rose, disappearing into the night, leaving Mina alone by the fire. She sat there for hours, her mind turning over the possibilities, the choices that lay ahead. She knew she couldn't return to Awara, but she could carry its memory with her, a reminder of the pain she had caused and the lessons she had learned. As dawn broke, she rose from the fire, her heart a little lighter, her resolve a little stronger. She would move forward, not as the person she had been, but as someone who understood the weight of trust, the value of community. She had lost her place in Awara, but perhaps she could build something new, somewhere else, a life defined not by ambition, but by redemption. And so, with the first rays of light guiding her path, Mina continued her journey, determined to make something of the lessons she had learned, to find a way to live with the choices she had made. As Mina continued her journey, the seasons shifted, and the world around her seemed to mirror her own transformation. She wandered from village to village, keeping to herself, her only possessions the worn bag slung over her shoulder, and the remnants of Awara's kindness that she carried in her heart. With every step, she felt herself growing, her past mistakes shaping her into someone different, someone who understood the weight of her choices. One evening, as the first chill of autumn settled over the land, she found herself in a small, quiet village nestled along a winding river. She had arrived tired and hungry, her clothes dusted with the wear of her journey. The village was modest, smaller than Awara, but it had a warmth that made her heart ache with memories of the life she had left behind. She headed toward a small inn, where the innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, welcomed her warmly. As Mina ate her meal in silence, she overheard bits of conversation drifting from a nearby table, a group of villagers discussing their plans for the coming harvest, worrying about their supplies, and debating how they would store the yield safely. Their voices were filled with concern, the weight of their livelihoods pressing on each of them. Mina listened, feeling an unexpected pang of empathy. She remembered how the villagers of Awara had shared similar concerns, their community bound together by their shared struggles and triumphs. For the first time since her exile, she felt a stirring of purpose, a desire to help, to give something back. After finishing her meal, she approached the group cautiously, clearing her throat to catch their attention. The villagers looked up, surprised, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and mild suspicion. Mina offered a small, humble smile. "Excuse me," she began, her voice soft. "I couldn't help it over here. You mentioned you were worried about the harvest. If there's anything I can do to help, I'd be glad to offer my assistance." The villagers exchanged glances, surprised by her offer. One of them, an older man with gray-streaked hair and a weathered face, regarded her thoughtfully. "You're a stranger here. Why would you offer to help us?" Mina hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of her past pressing down on her. She could sense their weariness, their reluctance to trust someone they didn't know, but she also knew that trust could be built, that actions could speak louder than words. "I've traveled a long way," she said, choosing her words carefully. "And along the way, I've come to understand the importance of community. I don't have much to offer, but I know a bit about organizing supplies and managing storage. I learned from a village that once welcomed me." The older man studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. If you're willing to work, we could use an extra pair of hands. The harvest is coming quickly, and there's much to be done." Gratitude surged through Mina, and she inclined her head respectfully. "Thank you. I'll do whatever I can to help." Over the next few days, Mina worked alongside the villagers, rising early to help with the harvest, her hands blistered from the work, but her heart feeling lighter with each passing day. She spent hours in the storage areas, organizing the crops, advising on ways to keep the supplies safe, drawing on the knowledge she had gained from her time in Awara. She offered her suggestions humbly, never imposing, but the villagers soon recognized her dedication and began to trust her input. As the days turned into weeks, Mina found herself growing closer to the people around her. They were cautious at first, but her willingness to help, her quiet humility, won them over. She shared their meals, listened to their stories, and learned their ways. Slowly, she became a part of their world, each day a small step toward redemption. One evening, as they sat around a fire after a long day's work, one of the younger villagers, a boy named Kofi, turned to her with a curious expression. "Why did you come here, Mina? You don't seem like most travelers. It's almost like you're searching for something." Mina looked into the flickering flames, feeling the familiar pang of regret mixed with the warmth of hope. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to speak openly. "I am searching," she admitted, her voice soft. "I came here because I made mistakes in my past, mistakes that hurt people I cared about. I lost something precious because of my choices, and I've been trying to find a way to make up for it ever since." The villagers listened quietly, their expressions contemplative. Mina felt her heart race, worried that her confession would drive them away, that they would see her as the deceitful person she had once been. But to her surprise, the older man who had first accepted her into the village reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We all have regrets, Mina," he said gently. "But it's what we do after that matters. You've proven yourself to us through your actions, through your willingness to help without asking for anything in return. That says more about you than your past." Mina felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, the warmth of acceptance easing the ache in her chest. These people saw her not as a thief or a betrayer, but as someone willing to work for their trust, to make amends for her mistakes. She knew she could never undo the harm she had caused in Awara, but here, in this small village by the river, she had found a chance to rebuild, to create something new from the ashes of her past. As the night deepened, Mina sat quietly among the villagers, feeling a peace she hadn't known in a long time. She had found a place where she was needed, where she could give without taking, where she could contribute to something larger than herself. For the first time, her heart felt whole, the weight of her regret tempered by the promise of redemption. In that moment, she realized that her journey had been more than just an escape. It had been a path to understanding, to growth, and to the chance to become the person she wanted to be. And as she looked around at the faces of her new community, Mina knew she had finally found the home she had been searching for, a place where she could belong, not as a stranger, but as someone who had earned her place through trust and humility. Months passed, and Mina's life in the small village by the river had settled into a steady rhythm. She had become an integral part of the community, trusted and relied upon, her past a quiet shadow that lingered only in her own mind. She had found peace here, a purpose in serving others, and a sense of belonging she had once only dreamed of. But despite the peace she had found, there were moments when her thoughts drifted back to Awara. She often wondered how they were, if Tunda and Adama had moved on, if Dayo had forgiven her in some small way, even if only in the quiet of his own heart. She knew she could never return, but the memories of the village and the people she had betrayed were woven into her, an indelible part of her story. One chilly morning, as she was preparing for the day's tasks, a group of travelers arrived in the village. Among them was a young woman who wore the distinct attire of Awara. The sight of her sent a jolt through Mina, her heart racing as memories flooded her mind. She watched from a distance, torn between curiosity and fear, as the woman spoke to the villagers, her presence stirring a ripple of excitement through the small community. As the day went on, the woman approached her, and Mina's breath caught as she realized that the traveler's face was familiar, someone she had known only briefly in Awara. She was older now, her features more mature, but there was no mistaking her origins. The young woman stopped a few paces away, studying Mina with a mixture of surprise and something else, something that looked like recognition. You were in Awara, weren't you?" Mina felt the blood drain from her face, her heart pounding as she nodded slowly. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was there, but I left a long time ago." The woman's gaze softened, and she took a step closer. "They still speak of you, know. For a long time there was anger, bitterness, but after you left, Dayo would sometimes mention you, wondering if you had found peace, if you had learned from what happened. Mina looked down, her heart aching at the mention of Dayo's name. She could picture his face, his disappointment that day in the square, the hurt she had caused etched into his expression. I have tried to change," she said quietly, feeling the weight of her confession. "I've worked hard to earn trust again, to live honestly. But I never forgot what I did to them, to all of you." The young woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. "They know that. They have seen it in their own way. Some of them even say they forgive you." The words hit her like a wave, unexpected and overwhelming. Forgiveness. It was something she had longed for, something she had almost convinced herself she would never receive. She looked up, her eyes searching the young woman's face. "Forgiveness," she echoed, her voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," the woman replied softly. "Forgiveness isn't always spoken aloud, but it's there. And some wounds take time to heal. But you left an impact, Mina, more than you might realize. People still speak of you, and there are those who wish you well, despite everything." Mina felt her heart swell with a mixture of relief and regret. She had not expected forgiveness, but now, knowing that it was there, even in some unspoken form, lifted a burden she had carried for too long. She had worked so hard to make amends in her own way, to prove to herself that she could change, but this quiet absolution from Awara was something she had never dared hope for. The young woman looked at her with a small smile. "I should be going. My family is waiting. But I'm glad I found you, Mina. Awara is too." As the woman turned to leave, Mina watched her go, feeling a sense of closure settle over her. Awara would always be a part of her, a chapter of her story she could never erase. But now, the guilt and regret were tempered by the knowledge that, in some way, she had found forgiveness. In the days that followed, Mina continued her work in the village, her heart lighter, her steps steadier. She poured herself into her tasks with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her journey was not only about redemption but about honoring the memory of those she had wronged. Years passed, and Mina remained in the village, becoming a beloved figure known for her kindness, her wisdom, and her willingness to help anyone in need. People came to her with their troubles, their hopes, their fears, and she listened with the same quiet patience she had once learned from Dayo. She had built a life that was both fulfilling and humble, a life that reflected the lessons she had learned through pain and regret. And though she would never return to Awara, she knew that a part of her would always be there, woven into the lives of the people she had once hurt. She carried them with her, their forgiveness a guiding light that reminded her of the path she had chosen, a path marked by humility, understanding, and a deep respect for trust. In the end, Mina had found the freedom she had sought not in wealth or escape, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had changed, that she had grown, that she had learned to live with her past and build a future rooted in kindness and compassion. Her journey had begun in betrayal, but it had led her to something far greater, a sense of peace that came not from running away, but from facing herself, from embracing the painful truths that had once haunted her. And as she watched the sun set over the fields, Mina knew that, at last, she was home.